Hello, this is Elizabeth Chu, the CEO of the South Carolina Historical Society. Welcome to From the Vault, the South Carolina Historical Society podcast, created and hosted by my colleague Sydney Derrick, our librarian. This podcast will demystify archives. I am passionate about convincing people that archives are not in any way boring. They are, in fact, incredibly interesting. Who doesn't like to read stories about other people? Imagine spending all day long in a library reading someone else's diary. That is what historians and people who use archives do every day. From the Vault, we'll be telling stories of all South Carolinians from the perspective of the many fascinating items in our large and important archival collections.
Hello and welcome to From the Vault, the South Carolina Historical Society podcast. As you just heard from Elizabeth, I'm Sydney Derrick, librarian here at the Historical Society. Today, we are starting with a talk, written down really in letter form within the Council of Safety journal in the Henry Lawrence papers held in our archives. And this talk was given to the people of the Catawba Nation by members of the council to explain the beginnings of the American Revolution. So we'll discuss the talk today and how it may have influenced the Catawba in their role later on in the Revolution. But first, let's talk about some announcements. Our fall program is coming up later this month on October 25th, and we are heading to York County. The day will include a tour of the archives at the Historical Center of York County, a lunch and learn lecture on the Battle of Cowpens, and a tour of historic Brattonsville. Tickets are $40 for the full day of the program, and that includes lunch, and you can head to our website to register. And we are getting spooky on October 30th with our Spirits of the Past event at our Fireproof building in Charleston. This event is for those 21 years old and over, and you can enjoy spirits from the bar and light bites while exploring chilling artifacts from our archives, like centuries-old hair and haunting death masks. You can get tickets and more info on both of our events at our website, schistory.org. And just a note here that if you're listening well after the original air date of this episode, these events and activities and my announcements might not be relevant anymore, but you can always see the latest news and events on our website. Again, that's schistory.org. Just a few weeks after the South Carolina Council of Safety formed in the summer of 1775, two representatives from the Catawba Nation visited Colonel William Moultrie, and he passed their concerns on to the council. The Catawba people had noticed that the colonists had begun to prepare for war and wanted to hear from the men of the state government what exactly was happening. In the council's journal, they wrote a talk given to the visiting Catawba men explaining the events. So in addition to the Council of Safety journal and the Henry Lawrence papers, our sources for today's episode are The Catawba Indians, the People of the River by Douglas Summers Brown, the South Carolina Encyclopedia, Journal of the Second Council of Safety published in Volume 3 of the Collections of the South Carolina Historical Society, and Journal of the Council of Safety published in Volume 2 of the Collections of the South Carolina Historical Society. On July 4th, 1775, the council secretary writes about the two Catawba men who were sent with questions, and the council resolves to write a letter that could be read to the two men and sent with them back to the Catawba people. It was drafted by the Committee of Intelligence, led by William Henry Drayton, that night, amended by the council the next day, and delivered within that same meeting on July 5th. I'll read the first two paragraphs to get us started. Friends and brothers, we find that in these troublesome times you are come to Charlestown to hear news and to know the cause of our warriors cleaning their guns and putting on their shot pouches. We therefore speak to you as if your whole nation, your head men, your warriors, your young men, were now before us. For we desire you will carry this talk to them. Brothers, we take you by the hand. The white people of this country who live among you desire you will open your ears to hear what we say to you, and that you will remember it as surely as you remember when it is time to go hunt and when it is time to plant corn. For we have a long time held you by the hand of friendship, and if you mind what we say, we will continue to hold you fast. But if you do not mind what we say, you will be sorry for it by and by. Unfortunately, and spoiler alert, we don't hear any response to this letter from the Catawba people within the later Council of Safety minutes. So most of what we talk about in this episode will be from the perspective of the South Carolinians who were leaders of the state at the time. But looking at the trajectory of the Catawba people's involvement in the American Revolution can give us an idea of how they responded to this letter/talk. I'm going to read some more of the letter in just a moment, and it's really interesting to hear how the men of the Council of Safety describe the conflict. It tells us a lot about how they were approaching it and where they were in the sequence of events at this moment. One thing that I think can get lost in the way that we look at the revolution today is that at this point, the council still had some sense of reverence for King George to a certain extent. You can hear them later on in this letter when I read it, blaming the conflict on the men around the king and the bad advice they were giving him. This talk is really about showing the Catawba that the needs of the white men affect the needs of the indigenous people, and because of that, the council urges the Catawba to join their cause. So let's hear some more. The great king over the great water has got some bad men about him who every day give him a bad talk about us and the people of North Carolina and Virginia and Pennsylvania and New York and Boston. And they persuade the great king to take our money out of all of our pockets, whether we will or not, which you know is a very bad thing. The great king wants us to pay 4 deer skins for those goods which we need to buy for 2. We are sorry for this upon our own account, and we are sorry for it also because you and the Cherokees and the Creeks must suffer in the same way. For if the great king makes the white people give so much more for the same kind of goods than they need to do so, so the white people will be obliged to make you buy your blankets and your match coats, your shirts and your paint, your guns and your powder and bullets, and your rum a great deal dearer. And because we won't give them our money, a great deal of money for a little goods, these bad men have given crooked talks to the great king to send the redcoats. They want now to take our money, as we told you before, whether we will or not. Some of these redcoats have been to Boston, New England, and because the white people there would not stand quiet and let them take their money, they have had a great fight in a whole day. The people in New England killed a great many of the redcoats and drove them to their ships, their houses upon the water, where they are now penned up and must soon go over the water again. If they come upon land, more must be killed and taken prisoner. Of course, at this point, the battles of Lexington and Concord had happened in the Boston area. That's what they were describing in that paragraph. And many states had begun thinking, planning, and creating governments separate from that of Great Britain, just like our Council of Safety. All right, back to the letter. And as we, your brothers, think these bad men about the king may persuade him to send his redcoats to New York or Virginia or to Charlestown to try and take our money, whether we will or not, all the white men in this country are cleaning their guns and putting on their shot pouches to help one another against the redcoats or anybody else that may come to make war. For all the white men are resolved that they will not be cheated any longer, and so we expect we will get our goods cheaper, and then we and you will have goods plenty and cheap again. For now that the king asks more skins for the goods than we think we ought to pay, we will not buy any, and so goods are scarce in the stores. And for this reason, because we will not buy these goods, the people over the great water are now quarreling with the great king and say we ought to have the goods as cheap as we used to have them. Now we hope you have opened your eyes and that you see plainly that your case and our case is just the same, and therefore we expect that your warriors will join our warriors in this business, which concerns you as much as it does us. And we acquaint you that we are willing to pay some of your warriors in order to show that we look upon your nation as brother warriors. We are willing to hold you fast by the hand, and we think it is best to tell you that we have heard a bad talk about you, and we tell you this because we hope you will let us see that you will hold us fast by the hand also. When we were told that the Cherokees wanted you to join them to set up the war whoop this summer and that you were going from your towns to join them, we shut our ears and would not believe this bad talk. For we know the Cherokees must remember that last war, a great many white men went into their country, and they must know that if they are so foolish to set up the war whoop, that we have now got a great many more warriors than we had last war, and that we can send a great many more into their country as soon as they take up the hatchet. And we know that the Catawbas are but a small people, and that you have always found we and our fathers have used you and your fathers like brothers. For these reasons, we did not believe the bad talk against you and the Cherokees. But we will tell you plainly, if you show a design to leave your towns and go further from us, our warriors will set up the war whoop and look upon you as enemies. And if the Cherokee shall be so foolish as to take up the hatchet, we will call the people of Virginia and North Carolina. We will all join. We will go into the Cherokee country. We will never make peace with them. But we hope the Cherokees, who we look upon as our brothers and fast friends, will not be such rogues. One aspect about the Catawba that is important to note here is that this society was based on hunting and gathering. They didn't typically plant food, so the majority of their economy was based on being able to trade what they hunted. For many years prior to the American Revolution, there had been conflicts over the land that the British inhabitants would allow them to hunt on, with Royal Governor William Bull telling them just to plant corn and sell it when they came to him with concerns that the land they were allotted for hunting by the Treaty of Augusta was not enough. But again, that's not something that they were really experienced in doing. And after those questions about the land came up, a rumor also arose that the Catawbas were going to work with the Cherokee people to attack the colonists. Now, this is back in 1770-ish, so it's a few years before the time period that we're talking about here, but talks between the leaders did smooth things over, and Governor Bull issued proclamations to allow the Catawbas to hunt undisturbed, but land issues would continue even well after the revolution was won. Just a few months before this letter was written, another rumor swirled that the Catawba people had been part of the Battle of Point Pleasant between the British and the Shawnee people, and that Catawbas took part in killing some of the British. The chief of the nation, King Prow, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, it's spelled P-R-O-W, wrote that it had not been them involved in the killing, saying, quote, "It would be very unreasonable for a child to kill a father or one brother another, and this must be the case if we should offer to murder the white people. It is from them all our benefits flow, our apparel, guns, and ammunition. All are procured from them, and our nation are in the midst of them." End quote. And part of what he's saying there goes back to this case that the Council of Safety are trying to make to the Catawba in this letter. If goods are cheaper for the white people who are trading with Great Britain, goods will be cheaper for the Catawba who are trading with the white people. So again, it's just a few months after King Prow wrote that the rumors were untrue about the Catawba people that the representatives came and asked William Moultrie to explain why the white people in their midst seemed to be preparing for battle. Okay, let's get to the last part of this talk. Now we have told you all this, that you may know that we do not believe the bad talk as have heard about you and the Cherokees, and we have shown to you that the case of all the Indians and our case is the very same, and therefore they ought to join us. We give this talk to you as a good talk, for we talk to you about these mischiefs that will happen to the Indians if they take up the hatchet, and how much it will be for their good if they keep a fast hold of the chain of peace and friendship which we now hold in our hands, and which we desire they will keep bright. For by this means we shall continue to live together as brothers. We desire that you will carefully remember this good talk. Send it by a headman to the Cherokees, and say you received it at Charlestown from the beloved men as a good talk for you and them. So the talk was delivered to the Catawba men in attendance, and a copy was made to be taken to the rest of the Catawba people. And the short story is that it worked. Just a few weeks later, on July 26th, the council read a letter that President Henry Laurens had written to Joseph Kershaw, a militia officer who had also served on the 1st and 2nd Provincial Congresses, thanking him for his help with the Catawba people. Kershaw had met with Catawba leaders and reported back that not only were they not going to fight against the Americans, about 40 to 50 men wanted to serve alongside the white soldiers in their fight for independence from Great Britain. The council responds to Kershaw to let them know when he has a white man to lead the group of Catawba who want to be soldiers, and that man was Samuel Boykin. Boykin met with Kershaw and the Catawba volunteers in Camden, but it took a little while to get all the men together because of illness that swept through the area, including one Catawba man who died on the way home from that meeting with Boykin in Camden. So before this company could form, another officer, John Withers, formed a company that included Native Americans, some of whom may or may not have been Catawbas. These soldiers were used as scouts to track down enslaved people who had escaped bondage. One of their missions was on Sullivan's Island in late 1775 or 1776 because the now former royal governor, Lord William Campbell, was believed to have been harboring enslaved people on the island. He was living on a British ship in the harbor at the time while his family was still in Charleston. In February of 1776, Boykin and 34 Catawbas received their first mission, and it was again to find enslaved people who had escaped bondage. Just a few months later, they were back in the fight, this time at the Battle of Fort Sullivan, South Carolina's historic victory over the British from a palmetto log fort that inspired our state flag design. You can hear more about that battle in our episode on it from the perspective of the 4th Regiment's Order Book. So that was Season 2, Episode 1, if you want to check that out. While the talk may have been effective with the Catawbas, it was not as successful with the Cherokee. In fact, some of the Catawba soldiers fought under Colonel Andrew Williamson against a portion of the Cherokee who were on the side of the British near Kiowa. In 1779, many Catawba men went with General Benjamin Lincoln to Savannah and fought against the British in what became the Siege of Savannah. From 1780 to 1782, while Charleston and a good deal of the entire state was under British rule, the Catawba Nation was an area of resistance. And these events that I've just mentioned here are just a portion of the battles and missions in which the Catawba people served and where their participation is recorded. The number of events they actually participated in is probably higher because they weren't all written down that these men were of the Catawba Nation. After the war, the Catawba men who fought for America's independence returned to their home, but the world around them was starting to change. In 1786, the chief of the Catawba submitted a petition to the state government through Joseph Kershaw. It described their service to America, saying, quote, "Whereas we, your petitioners, have always been loyal friends to the white people, and during the late war we have exerted ourselves as good soldiers on behalf of this state," end quote. It went on to explain that their way of life was hunting deer, but that recently they had been stopped from doing that by white people who owned property in the area. And in fact, they wrote that some hunters had been beaten because of their activities. Now, you may remember, even before the war, land was an issue, and it was supposed to have been solved by the Treaty of Augusta and then by proclamation, but it seems it was still not resolved. So now they're writing to the new American government. And many of the men the Catawba had served with or under were still in the state government, including Governor William Moultrie. In response to their petition, the Senate and House of Representatives passed an act notifying residents that Catawba were allowed to hunt anywhere in the state, as long as it was an open area and no inhabitants were hurt. But just as the struggle of where the Catawba could hunt in order to survive did not start there, it would not end there either, and it would last for decades longer. However, today's episode does end there. Thank you so much for listening and learning more about the Catawba people of South Carolina in the American Revolution. I hope you enjoyed this deep dive into the letter. We'll see you again on the second Monday of November with a brand new episode.